but my own. If there was really an insurrection, let's think about this for a second. If an insurrection...
Never said I oppose fracking. Show the tape. Put it on your website. Put it on the website.
Live from Clark Studios in Rochester, New York. Broadcasting around the world. You're listening to You Made It Political, where the voice of the keyboard warrior is finally heard and the arguments presented are put to the political test. And now, here's your host, Matt Clark.
We all know the teachers' unions have completely lost the plot lately. I mean, they've kept our kids out of school for nearly a year now for a virus that has a 99.8% survival rate. They continue to ignore the CDC guidelines. They don't listen to any of the parents ever, and they certainly don't really care what the children are going through. They've made that point very clear time and time again. But what takes the cake, what completely blows my mind, is when I hear things like they're now suggesting that we're going to start teaching them sex education when we finally do get them back to school. I mean, do they literally sit around a table and go through their book of really bad ideas and try to come up with the most outrageous curriculum they could possibly think of for our children? Well, that's what's going on right now. And when I read things like bills now being introduced in my own backyard here in upstate New York, that's going to now start teaching our children about things like gender neutral identity and transgender and sexual education and things as detailed as even, I don't even want to say it because we're on air right now, but to kindergarteners, 5-year-olds, I don't even know what's gotten into these people, and it's really, really frustrating a lot of parents. Today, we're going to take a look at a bill that they passed 2 years ago in California and why New York is now next on the teachers' union agenda of absolute insanity. Let's go to Fox News and we'll take a look and we'll see just how outrageous this bill is and who's behind introducing it right here in upstate New York. So Fox News, and this is national news now, okay? At first it was going around in New York, upstate New York specifically, because it's being introduced by New York State Senator Samara Brooke, and who is a Democrat. She represents western parts of the state, and she introduced a bill this year that would ensure all pupils receive, as an integral part of education in grades kindergarten through 12, comprehensive sexuality education. And I love how they use the word, or she used the word, we're going to ensure all pupils receive, as if we were really worried. Like, it's okay. We weren't concerned in the first place. No one's going crazy over the fact that our 5-year-olds aren't getting sex ed class. So she wants to make sure and ensure that our children as young as 5 years old are getting the sexual education that they need. So this New York bill would create, if passed, a comprehensive sexuality education for kindergarten students. Already, we have a very serious problem with what the children are learning in school. We're already indoctrinating children against the wishes of the parents in the first place, against their religious beliefs, against their moral beliefs, against their moral compass. We are indoctrinating our children in school against what the parents want for their own kids. And it's now becoming a serious problem. It started with Black Lives Matter. Fine, they let it go. But now it's trickling into discussing very, very private situations that should not be discussed in school. And what's very scary about the situation is that it's already been pushed through in California. And New York, seeing that New York loves to follow the Democratic playbook of insanity, they are now about to take California's lead. So before we get into New York, let's just take a step back and look at what's to come. If you want to know what's going to happen in New York State, with your children, with my children, our children. If you want to know what's going to happen in New York State, all we got to do is look at what's happened in California. So let's take a look. So in California, now this is in 2019. So for those of us who haven't been paying attention to our West Coast friends, 2 years ago, California already okayed new sex ed guidelines for teachers despite objections from parents and protesters. So that's the part that really worries me here, is that no matter how loud we get as parents, no matter how many protests we hold, no matter how many rallies and signs we hold up, and how many letters to Albany we write, nothing seems to get the job done. It's almost like we are irrelevant in the negotiation process. And we're seeing that right now today with trying to get these kids back into school. And what's really stressing me out, and so many other parents, is that we are now talking about the sex ed curriculum and what's that, and exactly what that's going to entail over and above and beyond actually getting the kids back into school 5 days per week. So California has already come out with this against all protests and objections from parents, and they lost, obviously. So the California Department of Education, they approved a very controversial sex education guideline for public school teachers Wednesday. Now, again, this is 2 years ago, that encouraged classroom discussions about gender identity and LGBT relationships. So this is now what they want to start discussing in school as part of the sex ed curriculum. They want to discuss gender identity and they want to discuss LGBT relationships. Obviously, the LGBT community, the advocates, have praised the new recommendations for giving attention to a community that is often left out of sex education policies. And I understand that. I understand that there's, the LGBT community also wants to discuss the fact that women marry women and men marry men and they have sex with each other. I get that. And for decades, they've been left out. But it does raise the question of, should we be teaching any of this in school then? Should we be teaching, if we're going to start getting into this level of detail, should we not maybe consider canceling the whole thing and just have this be dealt with at home again? I mean, this is getting too far off course now. At first it was, hey, make sure you don't get pregnant before you're able to responsibly take care of a child. So you might not want to consider having sex in high school. It's not a good idea. And for those of you who are going to totally ignore mom and dad, here's how to put on a condom. Done. We are taking it so far now that we are psychologically planting ideas in these kids' heads way before they're even able to comprehend and understand it. Because let's be honest, as much as the LGBT community wants us to talk about it, it's not mainstream. I don't care what you think. It's just not mainstream. Maybe it will be someday, but it's not today. So that's a conversation that I think should be dealt with at home, because most children have a mom and a dad. They don't have two moms. They don't have two dads, or three moms and two dads. It just doesn't happen, at least not mainstream yet. So when you start to get into the whole lesbian, gay, LGBT, QX plus, whatever you want to call it today, it's starting to really plant a psychological catastrophe in these children's minds that they probably aren't mature enough to handle in the first place. So clearly, many parents and conservative groups assailed the more than 700-page document as an assault on parental rights. And this is exactly what this is. This is an assault on parental rights. We're already seeing it with the whole equity and equality situation that we're teaching in school now. We're teaching racism the way that liberals want it taught, because let's be honest, school is primarily liberal based. So I'm not even going to pretend to deny the fact that, yeah, our kids are learning a very liberal biased agenda and they're being indoctrinated as such. So we now have racism being taught in school against a lot of parents' wishes. Situations that just weren't really a problem at home are now becoming a problem because kids and parents are fighting over what the parents think is racism versus what the parents think or what the kids think is racism. Because at home, they're being taught one thing, and at school, they're being brainwashed and told a completely other situation. So we're now causing a divide between parents and children at home, and it's really messing up a lot of families, which is why I've always had an issue with the whole Black Lives Matter, racism agenda being taught in schools, because it treads on the border or the realms of politics. And we all know that in school, politics is a big no-no. It's not to be taught in school. Why? Because we don't want the teachers persuading the children to either party. Well, racism, Black Lives Matter, it's not too far off the topic of politics today, and it's causing a big divide at home. So understandably, parents are furious about this situation, about the sex education now being taught as early as kindergarten, 5 years old. So the parents are extremely furious because they feel this is an assault on parental rights, claiming it exposes children to ideas about sexuality and gender that should be taught at home. And I absolutely 100% agree with them. Remember, for those of you who are just joining the show, we're talking about California, and then we'll take a look at what's going to happen in New York, because New York seems to follow the Democratic playbook of insanity that California usually pioneers. So, Patricia Reyes, a 45-year-old mother of 6, she traveled to this meeting in California. She traveled 400 miles to voice her concern, voice her protest about the new curriculum. She said it's just scary what they are going to be teaching. It's pornography. And she's referring to these books that they now want to introduce to these children. These books, which are very sexually implicit and paint a very detailed picture to children that probably really shouldn't be looking at books just yet, or at least in school. She says, if this continues, I'm not sending them to school anymore. Not everything under the sun needs to be taught to our kids with no moral judgment, Greg Burt, a director of the California Family Council, told the Sacramento Bee. And that's a very good point. We don't need to teach our kids everything under the sun. Who's responsible, or who gives our education system the right to come into our homes now and start teaching kids this level of detail? These very private and religious matters for many. Again, it could be going against their religious beliefs, their moral beliefs. Parents have their own way of raising kids. Nobody asked teachers and the school districts and the unions to raise our kids. Nobody asked them to teach them politics or racism. We tell them to teach math, history. Leave the rest to the parents, because these are very personal matters. So the department administrators, and I love this, so the parents have already raised their concerns. They've already voiced how upset they are over this situation. And this is the department comes back to. They said, but department administrators explain their views. And this is what I have a big problem. What do you mean, but? There should be no but. Don't give me any buts. I told you I don't want my kids learning from you these very private manners at such a young age. Case closed. There is no but. I don't want to hear but from the department administrators. They're not your kids. And somewhere along the line, they have seemed to have forgotten that. They keep calling the shots for our children. And when we voice our concerns and protests, there's always a but. We know better. No, you don't know better. You have no idea what's best for my children. So they've come out and they said, but department administrators explained their view. Okay, let's listen to their view. Our priority is to make all children feel comfortable at school. The Department of Education said in a statement, dispelling myths, breaking down stereotypes, and linking students to resources can help prevent bullying, self-harm, feelings of hopelessness, and serious considerations of suicide. Listen, I don't even know that teachers are qualified to be discussing these types of situations. I didn't know a teacher was qualified to break down stereotypes and linking students to resources that can help prevent bullying or self-harm or feelings of hopelessness. And I certainly don't think they're qualified to start discussing anti-suicide prevention methods and concepts. This is what you go to a psychiatrist for, and usually a children's psychiatrist. So now we're leaving it up to teachers with no formal psychology degree, especially children's psychology. We're leaving it up to now an art teacher, a math teacher, to now give a child a hug and say, hey, if you think you're gay, it's fine. If you think you want to be a girl, or if you're a girl, if you want to be a boy, that's fine. It's okay. You know, everybody seems to be doing it. So don't worry. You can come out with your feelings. What's going to happen when that kid comes out with their feelings to the wrong group of people and something happens? And then that kid goes home and does end up killing themselves because the teacher said, come out with it. It's okay. The school didn't accept it. Who's going to start suing who then? Because these teachers aren't qualified to be discussing these very important or very private situations with these young children. So the department has a but. They think they know best. They think they're qualified to now come out and discuss dispelling myths. And again, why are we leaving it up to them to decide what myths need to be dispelled? That is not a situation that needs to be taught in school. So more than 120 people in California, before this was all approved, more than 120 people registered to speak at the hearing to support or oppose the new guidelines for K through 12 health curriculum, as nearly 200 protesters rallied outside. Nobody cared in California. They didn't care. They went ahead with the agenda anyway, as they always do. I'm starting to wonder what protests even do today. When's the last time a protest ever got anything done? After several organizations pushed back on sexually explicit and offensive, reckless, and immoral books included in the document, the board decided to remove 5 books from the new framework. So at least they removed 5 books that they found were extremely offensive, reckless, and immoral. So the parents at least won that fight. One book was titled Changing You, which actually showed cartoon illustrations of male and female genitals and described what having sex is, was originally recommended for transitional kindergarten through 3rd grade students. This is the part that worries me, is that they were actually trying to push through a book for kindergartners up to 3rd grade called Changing You, which showed cartoon illustrations of male and female genitals and described what having sex is, as it was originally recommended to these children. So that's what happens in school now if the parents don't keep a very, very close watch on the type of indoctrination that is now being rammed down their throats. It took a protest of hundreds of people to say, you know what? I really don't think it's appropriate for a 5-year-old to be looking at a book of cartoon illustrations of male and female genitals and describe what having sex is. My son's about to go into preschool or UPK. He'll be 4. He'll be 5 in a year. He'll be going to kindergarten. There's no way in hell I want him reading books like this. These are not the books that I consider bedtime stories for my son. If there's parents out there that want to read books like this to their kids, that's fine. The LGBT community, if there's lesbian parents out there, gay parents out there, transgender parents out there, that's great. I have nothing against any of these groups. You're all great people, and you should all teach whatever you want to your children, just not to mine. And that's the point I'm trying to make here today's show, is that it should not be left up to the education system to teach our children about private matters that we may or may not think our children are ready to discuss. So it doesn't matter what your argument is. It doesn't matter what the education curriculum or whoever these people are that come up with this stuff. It doesn't matter what they want to teach. The answer is always going to be the same. It's not up to you to teach my children these private matters, especially if it goes against religious beliefs, moral beliefs, ethical beliefs. That is the right of the parents to decide, not the teachers. So they ended up getting rid of this book, which is great. Thank God. But ultimately, California finalized a framework that tells teachers and students in kindergarten. So after all the protests, after all the rallies, this was 2 years ago, they ended up finalizing the framework anyway and ran with the curriculum that the teachers thought best. And that was that they were going to finalize a framework that tells teachers and students in kindergarten that students in kindergarten can identify as transgender. So they're now telling children, this is the new framework. It's going to tell teachers that students in kindergarten can identify as transgender and offers tips on how to talk about that. Adding the goal is not to cause confusion about the gender of the child, but to develop an awareness that other expressions exist. Again, I don't know what kindergartner is mature enough to be able to handle a discussion on what transgender or what identifying as a transgender feels like. I don't know too many parents who would be okay with allowing a teacher and a kindergartner to discuss what it feels like to identify as a transgender. I mean, how would this kid even know? Unless, of course, it was discussed at home first. If that kid's having feelings as early as 5 years old, that's fine. But again, I don't think that's something that should be taught in school with a teacher who is certainly not qualified to be discussing such matters. So in California, they're able to talk about this stuff. They're able to discuss transgender feelings at such a young age. Schools are not mandated to use the new framework in the curricula. Now, this is California. New York's a different situation. Students are able to opt out from lessons about sexual health, but the state requires students to attend lessons that explain gender identity discrimination and social issues such as the Supreme Court ruling of same-sex marriage. Okay, fair enough. So what's going on in New York? Here we are in New York. We've got New York now. We've got Samra Brooke, New York State Senate, now introducing a bill that would create a comprehensive sexuality education for kindergarten students. Now, this bill's a lot more strict than California because I don't think it gives students the option to opt out. So New York State Senate, Senator Samra Brooke, Democrat, who represents western parts of the states, introduced a bill this year that would ensure all pupils receive, okay, again, we weren't worried. Nobody needs to ensure anybody here. We were not losing sleep over the fact that my 5-year-old wasn't getting his sex education in school. Nobody needs to ensure me that that's coming. But Samra wants to ensure everybody that as an integral part of education in grades kindergarten through 12, they're going to now get a comprehensive sexuality education. Public schools in New York can currently decide for themselves the level of sexual education they want to provide students. So that's what's going on right now. Public schools in New York currently decide for themselves what level. Now, I don't know if you parents who have kids who have already gone through school or kids in school, if you've ever been consulted about what you think that level should be, because I've never been consulted. Nobody's kind of sent out a survey to me. So I find it a bit crazy that parents aren't even getting surveys to say, you know what? I do think these topics are a bit overboard, and that if 95% of the people think we shouldn't be discussing it, then the school should take their cues from this survey and probably not include it in the curriculum. So as of right now, public schools in New York can currently decide for themselves the level of sexual education they want to provide students. Brooke said the new curriculum would cover issues like healthy relationships, body image, and self-esteem. Okay, now that all sounds very innocent, right? On the surface. Why not? Okay, healthy relationships, body image, self-esteem. Not a big deal. But if you dig deeper, you'll realize there's so much more to this that they are going to be teaching our children. In kindergarten, that looks like the basic lessons about friendship and communication. So they try to sell it and they try to spin it. Well, listen, hold on. In kindergarten, it looks like basic lessons about friendship and communication, providing students with the building blocks they need to tackle issues like consent. Okay, doesn't seem so scary. Let's keep going. Why is Assemblyman Michael Riley really upset by this? Well, he states that the bill would tie public schools to guidelines set out by the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States. So who are these people? Hold on a second. You just told me that what the guidelines are going to be. That in kindergarten, it looks like basic lessons about friendship and communication, providing students with the building blocks that they need to tackle issues like consent. That doesn't sound so scary. But what they failed to tell us, what Assemblyman Michael Riley now says is, wait, there's a lot more to this than they're letting on. The bill would tie public schools to guidelines set out by the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States. What's essentially happening is they would now be outsourcing their curriculum to this outside organization. Okay, well, what goes on with this outside organization? What's their agenda? Because it now doesn't matter what the public schools want to teach. They're going to be outsourcing this curriculum to this group, SIECUS group. So we would be outsourcing our curriculum to this outside organization. Riley told the newspaper that's a concern. Why exactly is it a concern? Well, according to the latest curriculum laid out by the Sexuality Information and Education Council, students start sexual education as kindergarteners, and by second grade should be able to define reproduction. They should be able to list medically accurate names for body parts, including the genitals, and discuss the range of ways people express their gender. So where have we snuck in expressing gender? Again, gender neutrality or gender neutral ideologies, I don't believe needs to be discussed at such a young age in school. You're now treading on the psychological issues that kids may be feeling that a lot of teachers aren't qualified to handle. So now we're supposed to let this group dictate the agenda, and as part of their agenda, they're going to make sure that the kids are able to define reproduction by second grade, list medically accurate names for body parts, including the genitals, and discuss the range of way people express their gender and how gender role stereotypes may limit behavior. For Christ's sake, these kids are 5, 6, and 7 years old. Why are we getting into any of this at such a young age? This is insanity. What kind of indoctrination are we ramming down our children's throats right now? This is getting a bit too out of control, and parents are furious over this fact. They are furious that in New York State, if this bill passes, that it's now going to be outsourced to this group that's now going to dictate to the schools how our children learn about gender, transgender, identifying as a different person. We already have this Rachel Levine in Washington already suggesting that minors should be able to make a decision as to whether they want to have a sex change or not without mom and dad's consent. So I understand the Democrats are trying to change America. Chuck Schumer very clearly said that. We take Georgia, first we take Georgia, then we change America. But this is like getting a little bit too freaky now. This is getting a bit, it's going too far. And parents are furious over this fact. So I'm not sure exactly who wants this for the students, but I think we need to remind the districts nationwide, the unions, whoever comes up with the curriculum, and now this new group here, or this group called the Sexuality Information and Education Council, that they're not your children. These are our children. And parents need to start being included in the conversation, because this isn't just how to put a condom on the banana anymore. This is how to go from being a boy to girl, and how to cut off your private parts if you're not happy, because Rachel Levine said we don't think minors should need their parents' consent anymore. If that's how they're feeling, then we should let them make that decision. Absolutely not. If a minor needs a parent's consent to get a freaking ear pierced, then that minor is gonna definitely need consent to have a sex change. You cannot tell me that having a sex change before you're the legal age of being able to smoke a cigarette is appropriate. You can't tell me that you can let a minor decide whether he wants to have a sex change before he's allowed to go into war or have a drink of alcohol. These are very serious situations that the schools are now getting in the middle of when it comes to their parents. They are causing a divide at home. Let's head over to the Keyboard Warrior Cam and see just how furious most of the parents are around America. Now remember, this is on Fox. This is nationwide. This has gone further than New York now. This is a bill that was introduced in New York. It's now on Fox, and there's comments nationwide. So the parents feel for us. For those of you guys who are in New York State right now, parents nationwide, they feel for you. They're furious. They're going to go to bat for us. Chris says, it's not up to the schools to teach sex ed to our children. That is up to the parents. Stop taking rights away from the parents, because what you may teach may go against their beliefs and religious rights. Absolutely. It should not be up to them. They have to consider the religious beliefs from these families at home. They have to consider their moral and ethical compass. And again, I'm not saying that transgender is wrong. I'm not saying that wanting a sex change is wrong. There may be children as young as 5 and 6 who are having some very real feelings. That's fine. They should be dealt with, but not in school by unqualified professionals who don't know the first thing about having these discussions with our children, nor do they know how to handle the consequences or the fallout of what may come from those discussions. Cindy says, dear politicians, please keep your noses out of the parents' upbringing of their children. You have interfered enough already by keeping the children from school. You weren't elected to stick your noses where they don't belong. She's absolutely right. You know what they were elected to do? Their job. They were elected to get our children in school and to give our children a sound education. So they end up going to a great school. So they end up getting a great job. It's like we're doing everything but that in school today. What are we teaching our children? Right now, we're not teaching them anything, at least in the blue states. They're home learning for maybe 30 minutes a week. They're getting no education whatsoever. And the first thing that we want to do now when we get them back is start rewriting sex ed and start teaching kindergarteners how to say private parts and how to gender identify if they're having weird feelings or strange feelings about themselves, and to discuss it at an age that they're not old enough to comprehend. That's what the Democrats or the Biden administration right now are most concerned about. Out of all the problems that we have in the world, this is the Biden administration's biggest concern. What Rachel Levine thinks about a sex change. I think we have other things and more important things to worry about in Washington than how we deal with our children in sex ed, a situation that shouldn't even be up to the school districts in the first place. How about you commit to teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, says Beth. Checkbook balancing, honor, respect, compassion, truth, and consequence. If you build the foundation, the respect and knowledge of life will follow. Not to mention, who says you have the right to our children's sexuality and souls? That is exactly the point I'm trying to make. And it's a great comment. Who says they have the right to our children's sexuality and souls? Because they don't. They do not. And soon we're going to get a lot more vocal than just a protest, because it should not be taught at such an early level. It should not be up to them. Dino says Catholic school enrollment is going to go through the roof. Not sure what these politicians don't get. We will always work around their insane policies. And that's happening right now. Public schools. If there's any teachers, educators, union presidents watching this show, you're not going to have any money soon. You're not going to have the funding needed, because all these kids are going to bail on your horrendous curriculum, and they're all going over to private schools. So as these kids all start to leave public school and head over to private, your funding is going to also plummet. And they're already starting to see that. Federal funding from the government to states like New York and California are rapidly declining because the kids in schools are rapidly declining. So the less kids you have in school, the less the federal government gives to these states in the form of federal funding. So I'm not sure why they don't understand this. I'm not sure why they feel like parents are just going to tolerate it. We're not. We're just going to pull our kids and put them into a private school or homeschool. Homeschooling is at an all-time high for a reason, because parents have had enough. And the unions, fine, don't listen to us. Teachers, don't listen to us. Superintendents, don't listen to us. Board of Educators, don't listen to us. That's fine. But when you're all broke and you can't even keep the doors open, don't come crying back to the parents, begging them to go back to public school. Because I'll tell you right now, it's not going to happen. Parents are so happy with how their homeschooling's going. Parents are so happy right now with the private school education that their kids are getting. Cindy says, this is unbelievable, and it takes a special kind of stupid to think that this is okay. If I lived there and was a parent, I'd be making some serious noise about this. People have lost their minds. Ellen says, if I had small children now, they would either be homeschooled or in private school. The government seems to think that they are now the ones responsible for forming these kids' morals in every way. Very, very scary. Why do our politicians think it's okay to tell or talk to our children about sex and gender identity at such a young age? Why do they feel it's anyone's business but the parents? Why do I feel like every single executive order that Joe Biden signs, that he is trying to take over the family household? Because that's what's going on right now. He is literally taking over the family household. Joe Biden and his administration are now suggesting that they know better than parents, that they know what these children should be learning. This is not a free market. This is not a capitalist democracy or a republic where the lawmakers start to tell us how we're supposed to treat our children. This is what happens in China, and I've seen it. I've lived there. This is no exaggeration. This is communism on its way. Forget socialism. We're going to skip right over socialism and go straight to communism, because the government now, with their insanity and their propaganda, their very liberal, heinous ideology and totalitarian concepts are now being rammed down the throats of our children, because they know they can't get to us. They know we're not changing. We're not changing our ways. We know. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, we're all set in stone. Our mindset is set. We're not changing. But they know they can get to the children. And that's what they're doing right now. They're going after the kids, which is why so many parents are pulling them out of school. It's not up to the Biden administration to teach our children because they think they know better, or teach children about matters that should be kept in the private home. Like somebody made a comment just a minute ago, reading, arithmetic, history. These are courses and classes that we grew up learning as children. So regardless of what direction the world's headed, it doesn't need to be taught in school. It's as simple as that. Amanda says, why are normal people not leaving the Democratic Party in droves? That's a great question. Why are normal people not leaving the Democrat Party in droves? I mean, come on. I have a lot of Democratic friends, and I'm kind of looking at you guys thinking, what are you doing? How can you be okay with this? Why are you still a member of this party? Because it gets more insane by the day. I can't even comprehend the stuff, the agenda that they're pushing. I see these videos. I see what they're giving to these kids coming home from school. I see it up on YouTube. I see them being passed around on social media. And we're all kind of sitting here looking at this like, what the hell is going on? None of this makes sense. And the only way it's going to change is if we get more Republican support and vote the idiocy out of office and start putting back America first, conservative values. I'm not saying we have to go guns blazing Trump country here, but this is going a little bit too far. This is very, very progressive. It's very radical. And I don't think this is what America wants right now. But we have no choice because we've lost all three branches of the government. There's no checks and balances. The Democrats continue to do whatever they want, and they are steamrolling right over all of conservative values and concepts that America's done very well living by over the last hundreds of years. Suzanne says children, especially in elementary, do not need to be exposed to comprehensive sexuality education. She's absolutely right. We need to protect our children from these predators. This is just another form of abuse of children. Our children grow up fast enough without being exposed to this type of sexual education. Let them remain innocent for as long as they can. Can we not let our children play with building blocks? Can we not teach our children to go build forts? Go run around the neighborhood. Go play kickball. Go do something. Get out of the house. Get off your iPads. That's what we should be doing. That's what we should be discussing in school. Teaching them how to put together puzzles. Why do we need to be teaching our kids this stuff? Why do we need? Who cares what direction the world is headed? I don't care if transgender's on the rise. I don't care if same-sex marriage is on the rise. That's great. That's great. And I think it's great that it's now legal. And I think it's great that we're now at a stage where we can talk about it. I think it's great as a country that transgenders don't get arrested like in a lot of the world. Most of the world, if you're gay, you're going to jail. So I think it's wonderful that America is so developed and so advanced that we can applaud people from coming out, that we could go to same-sex marriages, and that these wonderful people get the same emotional wedding and, a rewarding wedding that we all have gotten. I think it's wonderful. But we're adults. We don't need to be talking to the kids about this. What we do need to be talking to our children about is how to go build a fort at the age of 5 and let them be kids instead of cramming their heads with information that we know they're not mature enough to handle. If they bring it up, great, have the conversation at home. If they bring it up to what happened to a child asking a teacher a question that was inappropriate for a teacher to answer, which is what a lot of this is. What happened to, that's the question for mom and dad. We're now giving teachers our blessing to be able to have these conversations against our will in school if this law is passed. Let's over back to the keyboard warrior cam and see what the other American people have to say about the insanity of a bill being passed that's now going to let our 5-year-olds discuss concepts like transgenders, like gender-neutral ideologies and feelings that perhaps they're not ready for yet, or perhaps parents just don't want their kids discussing at such an early age. Ralph says, why do liberals believe that sexualization of 5-year-old children is okay? Their minds and bodies are not ready to process this information. This is disgusting, and it's child abuse. It's actually true. It is treading on the realms of child abuse. A lot of people are considering this pedophilia or teaching pedophilia in school, because there's a lot of books out there right now that are sending the wrong message to our kids. It's allowing adults to be discussing things with our kids that we're not comfortable with. And in California, there's a lot of cases of actual pedophiles getting away with teaching this kind of stuff. And nothing's being done. And now it's on its way to New York. Maureen says that's a parent's job, not the teacher or school job, especially since the woke mob is indoctrinating our children to normalize the abnormal and pay homage to debauchery. This is exactly what they're doing. We are normalizing everything. We're normalizing racism and what we're allowed to talk about and what we're not allowed to talk about. This is part of the whole cancel culture thing. We're canceling normal. That's what we're doing here. It shouldn't be brought into the classroom. We're trying to normalize every abnormal behavior. Let's not pretend that transgender is normal, because it's not. I'm not saying we need to hide it from our children, but being a transgender, having a sex change is not normal. Maybe it will be someday. Maybe it will be. But it's not normal now. And we are planting ideas in our children's heads prematurely before they are able to really understand and comprehend the information they're receiving to be able to then act accordingly. They're not adults. So he's right, or Maureen's right here. We're normalizing the abnormal and we're paying homage to debauchery. And it's a very dangerous game we're playing with these young children. And it's just not a decision that should be left up to the schools. Robert says, a definite Hitler move and a satanic move. Try teaching kids the basics and let the rest up to the family. True. Teach the kids the basics, leave the rest up to the family. The school should teach reading, writing, and math, and the remaining things they learn should be decided by their parents. Like I said, I have no problem with any of this. That's not the debate today. That's not the argument. The argument is, should it be taught in schools? I don't think so. Well, we now have a senator right here in my own backyard, Samra Brook, suggesting that we should be teaching sexual education to children as young as 5 years old. And the scariest part about it is that the public schools are now going to start outsourcing this to the Sexuality Information and Education Council, the SIECUS. And they are now going to dictate and call the shots, and the public schools aren't even going to have any control over it whatsoever. This is not what we should be indoctrinating our children to. But I'm not surprised, because every time I turn around, as Maureen just said, we are normalizing the abnormal, and it's not something that parents are okay with. Thank you guys so much for joining me today here at You Made It Political, every day at 3 o'clock. We'll see you tomorrow, same time.
Thanks for listening to You Made It Political with Matt Clark. Be sure to like, follow, or subscribe to the show, or leave us a review on iTunes. And if you like our show or want to know more, check out YouMadeItPolitical.com.